Welcome to the Dr. Berkson's Best Health Radio Show. What a time humanness is surrounded and sinking into. The CDC today, and we are August 25th, 2020, just came out with a statement that if you are in a retail store or on an airplane or in a restaurant or someone's putting an order in a fast food drive-thru and they're supposed to be wearing a mask and you tell them, remind them, warn them, and they get antsy about it, they get squirrely about it, don't take action. This is all on the throes of me just about to hop a plane for the first time in the pandemic to go for a much needed vacation. And I'm going to have to be on an airport, going to have to be interacting with people. And I honestly don't know what I would do if someone was in my small little space, my bubble in the airplane, and they refused to wear a mask. And now the CDC is saying there's so much trigger-happy anger, potential violence from people who refuse to wear masks that just don't push the river. So boy, I am not so comfy with that CDC statement. Life, I had a really dear friend, a dance teacher of mine for almost 20 years, and he was diagnosed with cancer a few months ago, and now he died. That was one day last week, and the next day, my best friend in Carmel Valley, she was evacuated out of her house because of the fires. Life is so fragile. It is just so fragile, and we live as though it's not. We worry as though it's not. We try and get all of our ducks in a row, and life is so dynamic, you can't possibly get all your ducks in a row. It's too dynamic, and we allow ourselves the frustrations. And here we are getting so angry that the CDC has to put out a statement, let my angry people go. So it's just a time, and I hope that this show can help you reach your highest potential of non-reactive reptilian brain and wish me good luck on my travels coming soon. It's my first real vacation in about 3 years. So I'm very excited, and I hope there's no mask naysayers in my bubble space as I travel through the world. Well, there was an event that happened last week of why we're doing this show, and I'm going to have to first give some back copy on the topic before we get to why the topic. And I'm all excited to let you know. We're going to talk about progesterone, the misunderstandings, the need to understand why you should even care, especially if you don't have a uterus or you're an aging woman and maybe even a middle-aged aging guy. So this show is about progesterone and why there's a need to have a show on progesterone. So progesterone got its name because pro to support and gest from gestation. So it's the main pregnancy hormone, progesterone. It protects pregnancy. In fact, a lot of reasons that some people have miscarriages or recurrent miscarriages or can't get pregnant is because they don't have enough progesterone, or their receptors that receive the signals of progesterone are wonky or resistant. So it's known as the pregnancy hormone, but it's actually made in both men and women, and it's made in other circumstances than pregnancy, and it does many, many things. It's made in the brain to calm the brain. It's made in the nervous system to calm the nervous system, and it's also made in tissues where estrogen works to calm and police estrogen. It's a pretty amazing hormone. Because it does so many actions. Some forward-thinking neurologists give high doses to autistic kids to calm down their nervous system. And Katherina Dalton, who was an English physician who came up with the term premenstrual syndrome and has about 55 articles in peer-reviewed PubMed on her, she's the one who really first put progesterone on the map. She noticed that women that could get moody or angry or edgy right before their period, but to the point of even creating crime. And she was one of the first people who linked progesterone insufficiency with behavior that was really out of control in the premenstruum, the week or two before the period, when you should have some progesterone. Usually women don't have it very much, if at all, in the beginning of the period, and they really make it in the middle of the phase to get ready for a pregnancy if the woman was to get pregnant. And if there's not enough, it can really affect the mood because it calms the brain. That's why it's made inside the brain. So a normal woman, when she is pregnant, to maintain a pregnancy, produces exceedingly high levels of progesterone every single day, about 400 milligrams. That's a robust amount, especially made by the third trimester. But Katherina Dalton said, these women really aren't making any progesterone for whatever reason, and that's a whole nother topic that we can go into, and maybe we'll touch on it. But in her testimonies, trying to help people not get into jail for the murder or the baby shaking or the stealing they were doing, she said these women really weren't at fault. It was really a progesterone insufficiency issue. And she treated these women. She treated them with suppositories, vaginal suppositories, and the dosages were from about 300 milligrams to 900 milligrams. And she did this for many years. She was in practice specializing in hormones and the emergent understanding of premenstrual syndrome and the application of progesterone to treat it for many years. And she used these very high numbers, and nobody seemed to ever get into trouble. And she was very famous. And a lot of these women didn't get put in jail because they got on progesterone replacement, and it calmed down their brain, calmed down their nervous system, and they were promising never to be criminals again. So progesterone is quite extraordinary, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about progesterone, and it has lingered in the literature. I remember when I wrote the book, Safe Hormones, Smart Women, I was talking about how the terms progesterone, which stands for your natural progesterone, we call it endogenous progesterone, exactly the molecule that your body is set up to make in pregnancy, and progesterone is also made in men and women. It is produced all throughout the body, not just when a woman ovulates, but it's produced in the brain, it's produced a bit in the heart, it's produced a bit in the gut, and it's produced in these places even in men. But it's been very misunderstood. And the reason is that when a hormone first emerged on the marketplace to be a replacement hormone, the drug companies wanted to patent it so they can make money off of it. So they tweaked some of the atoms hanging off a progesterone-like molecule. So they made a version of progesterone that wasn't exactly a carbon copy, which is an old term, or a just the fax ma'am, a fax copy, or an exact copy of our natural progesterone. And those are called progestins. And progesterone and progestins are two different total animals. And many scientific and medical articles use these terms interchangeably. And they often use them interchangeably and not accurately. Sometimes they'll refer to progesterone in the title of the article and call it a progestin in the body of the article, and every which way, so that there's a tremendous amount of confusion as to the difference. And so I just want to talk a little bit about this and why I'm even giving this talk, which I feel is so timely, or our show today. So progesterone and progestins do totally different things. Progesterone, the natural molecule, is very breast protective. It reduces the risk for breast cancer. It often is helpful to treat fibrocystic breast disease that in some cases can increase the risk of breast cancer. And it also reduces the risk of cancer of the uterus, the lining of the uterus called the endometrium. And the reason it does this is that it opposes the growth potential action of estrogen. Now, progestins also protect the lining of the uterus or protect against endometrial cancer, but the use of progestins, synthetic progestins like medroxyprogesterone acetate, which was the most common progestin added to horses' estrogen, conjugated equine estrogen, in the combo pill called Prempro, which was utilized for many decades before the Women's Health Initiative. In the Women's Health Initiative, the use of progestins was associated with an increased risk of breast cancer by almost 26%, and that this risk, even if a woman went off the progestins, lingered for a while. Now, these are the same kind of progestins that are in birth control pills, and there are some studies to suggest that birth control pills increase the incidence of breast cancer, probably because of the addition of progestins, and there's some that say the other. But natural progesterone is breast protective, whereas synthetic progestins increase the incidence of some nasty stuff happening to breasts. Progesterone, as I just said, is made in healthy midlife men and women to calm down the nervous system. So progesterone promotes cognitive function and calming neurosteroids. Its main one, allopregnanolone. While progestins have been linked in the literature with being a little bit neurodegenerative, it's linked in the literature to increasing the risk of Alzheimer's disease in a robust manner. Different articles say different amounts. So when you read an article that says hormone replacement increases the risk of cognitive decline, the finger pointing should go to the synthetic progestins. Natural progesterone benefits heart health, both men and women. That's why sometimes we do replacement in gentlemen. It's not just women. So it soothes and protects the basic cell of the heart, the cardiomyocyte, while the opposite has been seen in the literature, then synthetic progestins that don't look exactly like the molecule that men and women have been born to expect in their body of progesterone. Progestins have been linked to an increased risk of heart attack by a little under 30%, and adverse coronary artery function, even in young women. And remember, some of these progestins are in birth control pills. There's progesterone has been shown by a colleague of mine, Helen Leonetti, to be very enhancing of bone integrity, whereas some of the articles suggest that the synthetic progestins are not very bone friendly. So one of the big deals is that progesterone is a sex steroid hormone. So most often it's made in a distant organ, swims through the liquid biological highways of your blood, and deposits its message to a gene in a cell by nestling or swimming on into a receptor. That's how sex steroid hormones work. But progesterone's an ancient and old and respected and a powerful hormone. So it can do a heck of a lot. So it can deliver its signals via a receptor or even without a receptor. The same with estrogen. These hormones that have been around a long time, there are signaling hormones. So they're getting better and better, more lubed at delivering their messages. So it can deliver its signal any way it wants. Kind of reminds me of that line in The Big Fat Greek Wedding where a man is the head of the house, but the woman, she is the neck. And she can turn the head any way she wants. And that's what hormones are like. They activate their receptors and they can turn the head, they can dictate it any way they want, how things go. So estrogen, when it swims and nestles on into its receptor, estradiol, the most politically correct estrogen because it delivers equal messages to most of its receptors, it signals growth, because you want a lot of things to grow and beat, your heart to beat, your breast to enlarge to get ready to give birth, your brain to thump in a sense or have neuroplasticity, rhythm to think. But you don't want too much growth because overgrowth or growth out of control is cancer. So the big deal with the balance of estrogen and progesterone is that estrogen stimulates, whereas progesterone calms. Estrogen boosts growth signals, and progesterone releases controlled growth signals. And this is especially true at the lining of the uterus, called the endometrium. So when hormone therapy first started being prescribed by physicians, thinking it was the elixir of life to make women feminine forever, women started getting, who were just taking estrogen, a higher incidence of uterine cancer because they got the growth signal at the lining of the uterus, but they didn't get the controlled growth. So the Zen balance. So estrogen, progesterone together make a Zen balance at tissue level, especially the lining of the uterus as we're talking about. So they had this increase in endometrial cancer, and they said, well, if you give progesterone, and they were using synthetic progestins because they oppose estrogen, both synthetic and natural progesterone both oppose the action of estrogen at the lining of the uterus. So they started giving synthetic progestins, and the epidemic of endometrial cancer went down. And the thought became that you really only need progestin if you have a uterus, because that's all it did. So if you didn't have a uterus, they would just give you estrogen because they didn't worry about the lining of your uterus. And if you had a uterus, they gave you estrogen, most likely conjugated equine estrogen, Premarin, along with the opposer of that estrogen, medroxyprogesterone acetate. But you just heard that progesterone does so many other things. Progesterone is heart protective, it's brain protective, it is breast protective, it's calming, it's nervous system protective, it's the yogic hormone. Oxytocin is the up hormone, and progesterone is the calm, Buddha hormone. And there's this balance between estradiol stimulating and progesterone opposing, so you don't get too much stimulation. And when women are on hormone therapy, the way they figure out if you're getting too much stimulation is they can do a vaginal ultrasound, and they measure what's called the thickness of the proliferation status of your lining of your uterus, called the endometrial stripe. And when you're, it shouldn't be more than 5, especially in mature women. Of course, it's thickening when you're getting pregnant, but in a woman on hormone replacement therapy, it shouldn't be over 5. So actually, the first year that women go on hormone replacement therapy, it's always a good idea to get a look-see, a vaginal ultrasound, and make sure you're not getting any proliferative or growth out of control action at the lining of your uterus. But this is why, I'm going to say a few more things, then I'm going to say why I'm having the show. But progesterone doesn't work unless there's some estrogen hanging around. They're very yin and yang. So when estrogen is around, progesterone receptors express. And so when estrogen it signals growth, and then it makes progesterone receptors kind of turn their satellite dishes waiting for the progesterone controlled growth signal. So estrogen signals growth, then it turns up the progesterone receptors they express, and then progesterone can signal and put the brake on too much growth. So nature has growth, and then nature controls growth. It's this kind of like a beautiful ballet. If we had some of those incredible Alvin Ailey San Francisco dancers doing this dance, we can see them doing a dance of growth and then controlled growth. And so progesterone signals protect estrogen, but they don't even turn on without some estrogen around. But only 30% of the cells in the uterus at a time might be expressing progesterone receptors, and many pollutants can bind and block to progesterone receptors. So it's an easily blocked and easily misunderstood hormone. But estrogen allows progesterone to signal because it upregulates the receptors that receive it. And then when progesterone signals, it protects the actions of estrogen in this incredible, ancient, lovely, intertwining intimacy between these two hormones. So progesterone receptor expression is driven by estradiol presence and is expressed in the breast and in the uterus and really all over the body. But there is this dance. And in the adult, the female breast, the mammary gland, the progesterone receptor isn't expressed in all cells. It's only in about a small number of breast cells. Just 7 to 10% of breast cells have progesterone receptors or are PR positive, and these cells aren't the cells that grow and proliferate. So we know that most progesterone signals are very breast protective, very lining of the uterus protective. So progesterone is set up by nature to control the growth in the body that occurs when estrogen tells things to get turned on. Progesterone says just don't stay turned on for too long. So this is the year where America is aging, and we now know that we are really an older country. We have about 14% of our 65-year and older, 14% of our citizens are 65 or older. And it's projected in 2060, about 100 million people will be 65 or older. And our younger people, that demographic is growing more slowly. Our older people are growing much, much more fast. And hormones are becoming in as an effective anti-aging tool, especially for the brain to protect mentation and cognition. So the battle is, who's going to be able to make all that money off of all those hormones that are now going to just over the next 10 years explode? Who's going to have the legality to manufacture or compound those hormones and make the money off of them? So it turns out that battle is on right now. And if you stay tuned and go to my website, drlindseyberkson.com, and sign up for my free tribe, you'll hear little emails about it. And if you join my membership at drlindseyberkson.com/membership, we talk quite a bit, because now hormones are coming into their own, and they're a powerful anti-aging tool. And who's going to get the money from that? So the FDA is poised to try and shut down compounding pharmacies' ability to compound bioidentical hormones. And 2/3 of most compounding pharmacists' business are bioidentical hormones. So we're talking about the FDA trying to shut down an industry. But nonetheless, to prepare for all of this, so far a group of 73 of us, and it's open and it's growing, of lobbyists, politicians, gynecologists, pharmacists, rogue people, activists, we're coming together and trying to figure out how to protect our rights. And because we believe that bioidentical progesterone, for example, is much better than synthetic, and also we think it should be individualized for each person. By the way, there's some bioidentical hormones coming down the commercial pike, but they're in 4 set dosages and they're oral. And we'll explain all of that, what the pros and cons of that, which we think there are more cons of that than not. But we think we should have the right, and a doctor and a woman should have the right to get their hormones any which way they want. And in the paper we think that's coming down the pike, the FDA is thinking that even though women might want bioidentical hormones, and even though doctors might want to prescribe them, if the FDA says they shouldn't, then they shouldn't, and that's that. So that seems to be an infringement on an industry, and an infringement on the rights of physicians, and infringements on the rights of people. So we're all coming together, we're meeting several times a week and getting our game plan, our campaign, because we have to be prepared. There has to be a lot of footwork to get things ready. Maybe it'll be a year campaign to educate the public, and to, once the FDA makes a statement, respond. And one of the gynecologists who's now recommending bioidentical hormones in her practice has been in functional medicine for about a year. And she started chatting, and she said in her space in Houston, all of the gynecologists think that bioidentical hormones are a joke. So bioidentical hormones are the exact molecule our body uses for these foundational signaling hormones. It's the patentable ones that are the ones made by industry to make a product and sell it and have stockholders and make money. But she said literally that these gynecologists think bioidentical hormones are a joke, and that she said they're very upset about them because they have observed there's an increase in endometrial cancer. I haven't heard about this, but she said there's a recognized upswing in endometrial cancer, and they all realized that it coincided with the increased use of bioidentical progesterone, which doesn't protect the lining of the gut. So this is what initiated this show. So I quickly wrote her in the side chat of the Zoom meeting, well, what my girlfriend and colleague, Helen Leonetti, in the mid-2000s, published 2 studies taking a look at the endometrial stripe of women who were on synthetic progestin versus women who were on bioidentical topical progesterone. And for 6 months, one woman got synthetic and 26 women got synthetic, and the other 26 women got bioidentical, and their endometrial stripe was tracked. And then there was a period of a few weeks, what they call a washout, and the next 6 months, the groups reversed. So for a year, groups of 26 women got either bioidentical or synthetic progesterone, and just exactly how the lining of the uterus reacted was monitored. And both forms of hormones protected the lining of the uterus. The endometrial stripes didn't get all fluffed up and dangerously enlarged. And that study was in 2005. So when I wrote that, I said, what about Helen Leonetti's study? She immediately wrote back and said that study was too old and it wasn't followed long enough. Well, the study came out in 2003 or 4 and 5. There were 2 studies that came out between 2003 and 2005. That's not so long ago, and just because science is older doesn't mean that science isn't accurate. Also, let's look at the new drug that's coming out. I ran over to the new methodology of how that new drug proved to the FDA, this new form of bioidentical hormones that's coming down the pike called Replenish. I went to look and see their methodology. So because the FDA said, you've passed all your 1, 2, and 3 phases of testing, we feel you're safe, you're effective, and you can go to market. So let's see what their design was that the FDA approved it to go to market. So their design was they took a group of women and they put them on these oral combinations of estradiol and their form of bioidentical hormones, and they monitored their endometrial stripe for a year. Very similar design between the two, and one of them is able to go to market. So what this woman was throwing out there, this physician, wasn't accurate. And that's the problem with hormones. There's so much information circling the globe that it's just not all that accurate. I remember that Dylan used to say the difference between me and some of the other singers are the words of songs are always floating around the world, but I keep a pencil in my pocket so I catch them, and not all the other great songwriters do. Well, there's not just words of songs floating around the world. There's a lot of compost floating around the world. It's just a lot of nonsense, and it's such a lot of nonsense about hormones, and what she said was not accurate. Now, there are some reasons, progestins differ greatly from progesterone in form and function, but they do both, the synthetic version and the bioidentical version, they both protect the lining of the uterus from excessive stimulation. But you have to make sure that you're on enough progesterone, and that's an issue because we have to talk about how you make sure that you get enough so that you get that protection, especially if you're taking bioidentical. But progestins don't perform any better than bioidentical hormones. And topical progesterone has been shown by Helen Leonetti to be effective at the lining of the uterus. Now, many doctors are recommending, let's talk about how to take a hormone, which is called a delivery mode. Progesterone, if it's taken orally, goes through the digestive tract. So it's acted upon by the gut flora, and then it crosses the gut wall and goes to the liver, and it goes through what's called the first hepatic pass. So you swallow progesterone, it goes through your gut, and it gets modified. So it's made into almost immediately lots of metabolites. And these metabolites are really cool because they're allopregnenolone type metabolites that we said are nervous system calming, brain calming. They help people sleep. They're Ambien-like. So if you take sustained time release progesterone before you go to bed, you usually can get a better, deeper, more restorative night's sleep. But you don't have too much of the full, unadulterated progesterone left in your bloodstream to oppose estrogen, and therein lies the rub. So some newbies in functional medicine that are giving women estrogen, but at the same time only oral progesterone, aren't giving enough progesterone to oppose the estrogen especially if the woman has a uterus at the lining, at the endometrium. So you cannot only take oral progesterone and get healthy opposition to your estrogen. You have to add some in another delivery mode. So the other ways to take progesterone are topical or vaginal. If you do topical, you have to rotate your sites. So you have to put it on a large enough area of skin because it tends to sit just a little bit under the skin. So you have to rub it in for at least a minute, put it in over your fatty areas because the fat absorbs the hormone and then sort of time releases it out. And you have to rotate those fatty areas. So your upper inner thighs and behind your back, if you've got some love handles, and maybe on your bottom. But you can also give it in the labia or the vagina, which is called mucosal delivery. And this completely bypasses the liver, and it immediately raises blood levels of progesterone very, very rapidly, much more rapidly than when you take it orally. And all of it, the majority that's going to be absorbed, raises the blood levels. It's not made into the metabolites that are made when the oral progesterone passes through the gut. So it's important these days. We now know we give lots of women oral progesterone because it gets rid of the hot flashes at night, helps you have a more restorative sleep. If you take the sustained form, it helps you sleep longer throughout the night so you're not waking up in the middle of the night, especially when you mix it with some melatonin and some magnesium. But you also, to oppose the estrogen that you're taking along with the progesterone, you need to take some other progesterone from another mode. And that can be topical or it can be vaginal. You don't need much in the vaginal, and topical amounts are usually anywhere from 20. The topical amounts are usually 20 to 90 milligrams. The vaginal amounts are usually much less. They're usually about 7 to 10 milligrams. And if you give any hormone vaginally to get a systemic effect, you're really looking at giving it twice a day, because it goes up so quickly in the blood and then it comes down that if you want to keep a little higher level of progesterone to give a little bit more the Zen dance, for it to dance on the dance floor with estrogen, then you need to, if you're giving it vaginally, give it twice a day. There was, we think of just progesterone being the policeman or the policewoman of estrogen. But progesterone, like many things in the body, can go down a good path or a bad path, or a non-pro-inflammatory path or an inflammatory path. And this all is based on the work of a Canadian biologist called Weeb. And he was able to show that the body has enzymes to break down progesterone into different pathways. And these enzymes are kind of all over the body, so we know that progesterone is supposed to have global activity all over the body. So to just take progesterone to protect a uterus is so old, so inaccurate, so not right. And then if you don't take progesterone because you don't have a uterus, you're missing out on all these other benefits. But what we do know is that in particular, one enzyme, 5-alpha reductase, will rapidly take progesterone and metabolize it into different metabolites. And one of these metabolites is a bit more breast protective and anti-inflammatory, and one of these metabolites is a bit more pro-inflammatory. In fact, Meridian Laboratory, about a year ago, based on Weeb's work, started being able, if you ask for a kit, they can tell you which pathways you're taking your progesterone down. But there's some debate where if women go on too high of an oral dose of progesterone, they can be taking their progesterone down a less healthy pathway, more pro-inflammatory for their breasts. But Katherina Dalton, who put progesterone on the map, she gave really large dosages for decades and she has 55 articles in peer review for decades, and she did not see an increased incidence of breast pathology. So, there's all this debate, and I don't know if we just started testing these. Weeb is a biologist. He's not a clinician. Meridian just started testing 9-10 months ago. So we're observing these different characteristics of progesterone, but we don't totally know, because I've seen clinically there's some women who need to have 200, 150, 300 milligrams of progesterone. And sometimes they have so much better experience inside their being if they're on progesterone every single day versus cycling. So it varies from the person. And I don't know if we can know enough about all of these metabolites. It's kind of at an academic point where we're observing this, but clinically you got to go the way the woman says she feels a lot better for a sustained period of time. That's where the rubber really meets the road. But if you take too much estrogen, the bottom line is, without sufficient progesterone, and testosterone is also a protector of estrogen. Maleness protects femaleness, I always like to say. But it's important that you and your doc know that you're getting enough progesterone to do that intimate dance in the right balanced Zen manner when you're taking estrogen. And a lot of people are giving a little bit too much estrogen. That's a whole nother story that we could chat about. But it's important to understand, when you take a hormone, how is it balancing with your other hormones? What's the best delivery mode for you? What's the result of that delivery mode? And do you need to have a backup strategy? So if you're taking oral progesterone along with estrogen, your backup strategy is to take a second delivery mode of progesterone, because the oral doesn't oppose the estrogen. Now, some people take troches, which are said to be mucosal. You hold, it's in a little dissolvable lozenge. They come in different flavors, and you hold them against the side of your cheek. It's very similar to vaginal mucosal delivery, because it's the mucus lining of your mouth, but the problem is you still swallow it. So it's not completely mucosal, it's oral and mucosal. And I have women who come in and they're fine for the first few years, but after they're on a troche for a while, they start getting elevated endometrial stripes, proliferative endometrium, because they just aren't getting enough of that. They're swallowing too much of their progesterone, even though they don't realize it. So they're not getting enough progesterone to oppose the estrogen that they're on. So that is something to think about and to ask, because a lot of docs haven't been prescribing hormones for a long period of time because of the Women's Health Initiative, and now they're coming back in vogue, and America's aging, and we're going to start seeing it. These nuances aren't totally understood. So the brand new product, which, by the way, that company was begun by the old CEOs of Prem and Prempro, because their stock tanked after the nasty, scary headlines of the Women's Health Initiative. So it's 4 forms of estradiol with no opposing estriol, the anti-cancer estrogen, and micronized progesterone, and they're all oral. So you're taking an oral estrogen, an oral progesterone, and no other form of hormone. And there's 4 sizes, which sounds like they're trying to acclimate to individuals. But if you ever work in the office of someone delivering bioidentical hormones, if they have 25 patients, they might give 20 different ratios and milligram amounts. They really individualize, and they do it based on, most often, they take a test to see where women's hormones are at, give them some hormones, and then test them again in 6 weeks to see how they process those hormones. So the new FDA-approved bioidentical hormones coming down the pike will not have enough opposition to estrogen, and we don't like to see estrogen be swallowed. Now, there are many different people that have different perspectives on hormones, from allopathic to functional, and even within the functional community, there's a lot of disagreement, and people have their own philosophy. So there's a very famous guy out of Salt Lake City, and he says you could take estrogens orally, and you don't need estriol to. You don't need to add the anti-cancer estrogen estriol to estradiol. You're totally fine. And he's teaching a lot of people, and they give oral estrogens to women, and they have no issue for a while. Because when you take anything orally, your digestive tract and liver processes it, and you make a whole bunch of different metabolites. And many of these cause clotting factors and inflammation, and it's not the same as taking estrogen on your skin or inside your vagina, which do not make any of those procoagulative factors or those inflammatory factors. Some women can handle the oral and some women can't. Often after a while, and it's very convenient to take an oral for sure, but after a while, most of the women on oral will either end up having some problems, or they say, I've just done with hormones. I feel like my receptors are full. I feel estrogen dominant, bloated, whatever, because they're really making they're taking hormone metabolite replacement therapy more than hormone therapy. So it gets to be a different thing, but that's what's coming down the pike. And that's what the FDA would like to make as the main source available for women, whether women or doctors like it or not. And there's so much misinformation and miscommunication. Now, I wrote a lot of this in my book, Safe Hormones, Smart Women. So if you want to get that book, it's on Amazon. It's also at my site. And it explains a lot of the nuances because there's a lot of epidemiologic research showing that progesterone does not increase the incidence of breast cancer. And if anything, it has no adverse effect or no positive effect, or some studies show a positive protective effect, where it's the opposite with progestins. They have quite a bit of studies to show that they can do some nasty things down the road. They do oppose estrogen at the uterine lining. There is no debate about that. But they block the estrogen receptor beta, which is a protective receptor, and they've been linked to vasospasms and cardiovascular issues, cognitive issues, bone integrity issues, breast issues. So bioidentical hormones are coming. They are definitely coming, but how you take them and how your doctor knows the data. They don't know the data all yet, but they act and talk like they know the data. That's where it gets really tough, is people are usually down on what they're not up on. And in this world, one of the hardest things to do is know if somebody's really got their act together. They all act and sound like they've got their act together. They tell you this, and if you were my daughter, this is what I would tell you to do. And you think that all the degrees in the back and the white coat, and man, I mean, they just sound like they know what they're talking about, but it's really hard to know if you really know what they're talking about. There was this man that I have so much respect for. His name is David Hawkins. And he was one of the psychiatrists that helped with Candace Pert initiate the functional medicine psychiatry field. And they introduced neurotransmitters and the understanding of lifestyle and food and neurotransmitters and mind and mood. And when he reached a more senior citizen age, he was a thinker, an agile thinker. And I really think, that's not what's taught in school. You're taught to be a good student. You're not taught to be an agile thinker. And then, you're not in control of your brain, and your brain's an amazing instrument, but you want to be in control of your brain. That's what agile thinking does. It helps you be in control of your brain. So he was in control of his brain, David Hawkins, and he said, I'm done with medicine. I'm just done with medicine. And I'm going to jump into a metaphysical spiritual path. And he wrote, I think, 4 books, one of them, Power versus Force. Very heady, deep books, but phenomenal books. And actually, he was here in town right before he died, a little bit before he died. And he spoke at Unity Church of the Hills on Anderson Mill, holds about 350 people. There were about 1,000 people showed up that day. It was wall-to-wall people to hear. He was such an agile thinker. It's a gift. It's a gift to be in the presence and to hear an agile thinker, because we have to be motivated and inspired to learn how to do it, because we're taught to be sheep, So I was struck by his saying that the glitch in humanity when God designed humans is that you can't really tell if somebody's telling the truth, which is why human beings are so easily manipulated and controlled. And he has a way of calibrating consciousness and giving some guidance on how to do it. But the statement was really, it's so hard to tell whether it's politicians or doctors or lawyers. I remember once, I I had these pair of Italian shoes I bought in Italy, and I just loved them. And the soles were really going bad. And I took them to this one shoemaker. He said, you just can't fix the soles. You're going to have to throw these shoes out. Took 'em to another shoemaker. He said the same thing. And came home from Oklahoma and took them to another shoemaker. They said the same thing. And I was going to throw them out, but I thought, I'm going to try one more time. So I went to a different shoemaker, and I gave him these shoes that I love so much that were on their last incarnation. And he said, I could fix those in a nanosecond. No worries. And he did. So, opinions are just opinions. They're just opinions. And the problem is that, they're paid to know, and you're paying them and you want them to know. So they act and sound like they know, but it doesn't mean that they know. And that's especially true in the arena of hormones. So what David Hawkins said is, it's really hard to know if somebody's really got their cognitive shit together. It's so, excuse my French, I guess everyone swears these days, and you kind of want to let a little bit out here and there to be more colorful, but from old school, it still feels a little, I think my transitional epithelium in my bladder just cringed a little bit. But anyway, it's so hard to tell if someone really knows the truth or the facts. They could be a gynecologist that says, look, there's an epidemic. Oh, that was the other thing. So, I looked and sleuthed the peer-reviewed literature. Was there an epidemic of uterine cancer recently? No, nothing was written about it in the peer review. And I called all my colleagues who are hormone docs in the field for anywhere from 25 to 40 years. Have you seen any upsurge in endometrial cancer? And they all said, no. So she threw that out there like it was fact, just fact. And she knew it because this was her field, and she was wrong. Her facts were wrong, but you wouldn't have known it if you would have heard her and you would have seen the diplomas on the wall. So that's why it's so cool that people have shows now on information and biohacking and conversations and letting people in on these dialogues. But we need to do it because whatever the way the world is run by just bowing down to all of these impeccable credentials hasn't been working because we're totally ill. We're completely ill and it's not working, and we're aging, and we have a huge increasing incidence of cognitive decline, type 2 diabetes, cancer, on and on. Many of these things that are now being shown to be protected by hormones, and the time of comorbidities being put off more in the future and compressed more later on in the future if you know how to take hormones safely, balanced, individualized, and do them in a right way. So there is really a call for standard of care in hormones. Maybe there needs to be a board certification program so people can be really trained. But the problem is some doctors say, the only way to test is saliva testing, or the only way to test is blood testing. And there's all these only ways. And, when you go to school, it's nice to learn all of the ways, and you can decide what you want to do. Sometimes if I have a very complex case with a patient, I'll run her hormones on exactly the same day, sometimes even a guy, from a variety of different portals of blood and 24-hour urine, and maybe even a little bit of saliva. And it gives me even a bigger picture. So I'm not Velcroed to only one perception. So if a patient doesn't fit into that one perception, I have more fluidity to consider them with these other tools in my tool bag. So I realized I had to do a show on what's going on with progesterone. It's misunderstood. We do need to be on it. Sometimes men need to be on it because it has this nervous system calming, protective, and men often get much higher levels of estrogen as they age, especially if they get fatter. Fat cells manufacture estrogen, and men get feminized, and then their estrogen needs to be opposed too. So, but urologists don't know about measuring estrogen when a guy comes in and says, can you check my T? Most often they're not getting their estrogens tested, but a savvy doc will. So the whole idea is to become a savvier and savvier doctor and a savvier and savvier patient. And then that sweet and lovely combo duo can get you the best effects and the best bang for your money, and hopefully keep you younger longer. That is the whole deal, right? To keep you younger longer, safely younger longer. And it's going to be partially hormones. Hormones are going to be on the horizon. They're going to be one of the major tools, but you're going to have to go to docs that know how to use these tools so we can keep you safe. I hope that you have enjoyed this show on progesterone. And if you're somewhere where someone says they don't want to wear a mask, you can usually exit stage right. But if you're on an airplane, you can't exit stage right. So you got to say a little airplane prayer for me. Say a little airplane prayer for me. Say a little airplane prayer for me. And I am going to go on to Cape Cod with my dear friend. All the spaceships in space were growing microbial life on the walls, and they were having a hard time with the astronauts with all this toxic microbial life. So he invented the polymer that now lines all of the spaceships, which doesn't allow any microbial life to grow. So he's able to buy these really lovely homes like he has on Cape Cod that him and his wife have graciously invited me to, and we're going to learn how to make gluten morphed sourdough bread. That's the goal of our vacation, is to swim in the ocean in this bay that's only about 5 feet deep and luxuriously warm, and at the same time learn how to make sourdough bread. So I'll make some and hold it up for you and let you know how that goes. I really do. Sourdough bread has more of the gluten's process, so if you're not, many people who are gluten intolerant can handle some sourdough bread, but I find I long for that San Francisco sourdough bread flavor. So hopefully I'm going to learn how to do that on my vacation, and hopefully I don't bump into any unmasked men, excuse me, I'm stand corrected. Be well, be safe, and always ponder when someone is speaking to you. Their words might really not be reflecting the facts, even if they don't know that. So the more that you know, the more you'll protect yourself from these potentially damaging and maybe even expensive situations. So thanks for hanging out with me, and we'll meet again. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.